Elena stood at the entrance of the Grand Phoenix Hotel's ballroom, clutching her small beaded purse so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She had walked through these doors countless times before, but always wearing her gray cleaning uniform, always pushing her cart filled with supplies. Tonight was different. Tonight she was a guest. The invitation had come unexpectedly 3 weeks ago. She had stayed late one evening, long after her shift had ended, to help Vivian, the hotel's event coordinator. A pipe had burst in the kitchen, flooding part of the ballroom just hours before an important corporate dinner. Elena had worked alongside Vivian without complaint, mopping and drying the marble floors until they gleamed again. "You saved us," Vivian had said afterward, her designer heels clicking against the floor as she walked Elena to the staff exit. Then she had paused, reached into her blazer pocket, and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. "The annual charity gala is next month. You should come." Elena had tried to refuse. "I don't belong at fancy parties," she'd said. "Nonsense," Vivian had replied, pressing the envelope into Elena's hand. "Everyone who helps this place run deserves to enjoy it once in a while. Besides, it's for charity." Now, watching the glittering crowd from the doorway, Elena wished she had stuck to her first instinct. Women in flowing gowns and men in crisp tuxedos mingled under sparkling chandeliers, their laughter rising above the gentle music played by a string quartet in the corner. Elena looked down at her own outfit, a simple navy blue dress she had bought for her daughter Lucia's high school graduation 4 years ago. She had spent hours that afternoon pressing it with an iron, making sure every wrinkle was gone. She had even splurged on getting her hair done at the cheap salon near her apartment. But standing here now, she felt like an imposter. Like at any moment, someone would point at her and shout, "That's the cleaning lady. What is she doing here?" "Mom, stop overthinking," Lucia had told her earlier that evening as she dropped Elena off at the hotel entrance. "You work harder than anyone in that building. You deserve a night of fancy finger food and free champagne." Lucia was the reason Elena had come at all. Her daughter had been so excited about the invitation, so insistent, that her mother needed to experience something different for once. Elena couldn't bear to disappoint her. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to step further into the ballroom. She would stay for an hour, she decided, just long enough to tell Lucia she had gone and enjoyed herself. She would have 1 glass of champagne, try some of the food, and then quietly slip away. A waiter passed by carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Elena hesitated, then took one, offering a small smile of thanks. The waiter nodded politely and continued on his way without a second glance. No recognition in his eyes, even though they had shared the employee break room just yesterday morning. She wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. Elena sipped her champagne and began to walk around the edge of the room, trying to blend into the background, a skill she had perfected during her 15 years of cleaning up after the wealthy patrons of the Grand Phoenix. Keep your head down, do your job, be invisible. Tonight, those same habits served her well as she navigated through the crowd. The ballroom looked magical. White orchids and twinkling lights decorated every table. Ice sculptures caught the light and scattered it like diamonds across the ceiling. Elena knew how much work had gone into creating this perfection. Just yesterday, she had helped polish the massive windows that lined the far wall, now revealing the city skyline bathed in the glow of sunset. As she walked, she caught snippets of conversation around her, talk of stock portfolios and vacation homes, boarding schools and charity boards. A world so different from her own, where conversations revolved around rising rent prices, Lucia's college loans, and which grocery stores had the best sales that week. After 30 minutes of wandering, avoiding eye contact, and declining horsey d'oeuvres from passing waiters, Elena found herself drifting toward the back of the ballroom away from the thickest part of the crowd. Here, partially hidden behind a large floral arrangement, sat an old grand piano. Elena recognized it immediately. It had been a fixture in the ballroom for as long as she had worked at the hotel, though she had never once seen anyone play it. Every week for 15 years she had dusted its dark wood casing and polished its brass pedals. Without thinking, she moved closer to it, drawn by its familiar presence in this unfamiliar situation. The piano was the one thing in this room that she knew intimately. She had overheard the hotel manager once tell a guest that it was just for show now. Several of its keys no longer worked, and it would cost too much to repair. But they kept it because it matched the room's elegant aesthetic. Elena set her half-empty champagne glass on a nearby table and gently ran her fingers along the piano's smooth edge. A memory surfaced, her mother's hands guiding her own across. Similar keys, the smell of polish and the sound of her mother's voice saying, "Music lives in your fingers, Elenita. Never forget that." That had been so long ago in their small apartment back home in Mexico City, before they had moved north, before her mother had fallen ill, before life had swept Elena into a current that carried her far from the dreams of her youth. "Can I help you with something?" The voice startled Elena from her thoughts. She turned to find a young man watching her with a slightly amused expression. He wore an expensive-looking suit and held a martini glass between manicured fingers. Two other men stood behind him, their attention now focused on Elena as well. "No, I was just—" Elena began, stepping away from the piano. "Wait, don't I know you?" the young man asked, tilting his head. "You work here, right? You're one of the cleaning staff." Heat rushed to Elena's face. This was exactly what she had feared, being recognized, singled out, exposed as someone who didn't belong. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I do work here, but tonight I'm a guest." The three men exchanged glances, and something in their expressions made Elena's stomach tighten. The first man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A guest? How wonderful," he said, his voice carrying a note that made the words feel less than sincere. "And what brings you to our little charity event? Supporting the children's hospital, are we?" Elena straightened her shoulders slightly. "I was invited by Ms. Winters, the event coordinator." Vivian always had a soft spot for the staff," said another of the men, taller than the first with thick, dark hair. "Very charitable of her." They laughed, and though Elena couldn't quite put her finger on why, she felt like she was the joke. She glanced around, looking for an escape route, but the men had somehow positioned themselves between her and the rest of the room. "So," said the first man, gesturing toward the piano with his martini glass, "do you play?" Elena hesitated. Did she play? Once, long ago, she had. Her mother had taught her, and later, when her talent had become apparent, there had been proper lessons with Señor Reyes down the street, who charged very little because he said it would be a crime not to nurture such a gift. For years, music had been her life, her dream, her planned future, until life took a different turn. "I used to," she said finally. The third man, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward with an exaggerated bow. "Then we simply must hear. You perform, what a treat. Entertainment from the hotel staff." Elena shook her head. "No, I couldn't. It's been years, and anyway, I heard the piano doesn't work properly." "Oh, don't be modest," insisted the first man, his smile widening. He raised his voice slightly, catching the attention of a few nearby guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat tonight. One of the hotel's cleaning staff is going to favor us with a musical performance." More people turned to look now, curiosity on their faces. Elena felt trapped, her heart hammering against her ribs. The young man gestured grandly toward the piano bench. "Please," he said, "show us what you can do." Elena stood frozen as more eyes turned toward her. The chatter nearby had quieted, replaced by curious whispers. "What's happening? Who is she? Did he say she's a cleaner?" The three men watched her with smug expressions, clearly enjoying her discomfort. For a moment, Elena considered simply walking away. She could push past them, head straight for the exit, and never mention this humiliation to anyone, not even Lucia. But something kept her feet planted firmly on the polished floor she had mopped so many times before. The first man, the one with the martini, raised an eyebrow. "Well, we're waiting." His voice carried a challenge, and his friends snickered. Elena looked at the piano again. In all her years of cleaning it, she had never once touched its keys. It seemed wrong somehow, like crossing an invisible boundary between her world and theirs. But now, with all these eyes on her, the piano represented something else. A test, perhaps, or a chance to show these people that she was more than just the woman who emptied their trash bins. "The piano doesn't work properly," she repeated, her voice steadier than she expected. "Many of the keys are broken." The second man shrugged. "Then this should be amusing for all of us, shouldn't it?" A woman in a red dress nearby frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. "Thomas, maybe you should leave her alone," she said quietly, but the men ignored her. "Come on," Thomas insisted, gesturing again toward the piano bench. "Just a little tune, something simple." "Chopsticks, perhaps, that's easy enough," the third man laughed. "Or hot cross buns. Surely you can manage that." Heat climbed up Elena's neck, spreading across her cheeks. She could feel sweat forming along her hairline, threatening to ruin the careful styling she had paid $30 for, money she couldn't really spare. A few more people had gathered now, drawn by the commotion. Among them, Elena spotted Vivian, the event coordinator, looking concerned as she tried to make her way through the crowd. Elena glanced down at her hands, work-worn hands with short, practical nails and a small burn scar on the left thumb from an iron. Not the elegant, manicured hands that should touch such a fine instrument, even one that was broken. Yet these hands had once flown across piano keys with such grace that her teacher had wept. Before she could change her mind, Elena stepped forward and seated herself at the piano bench. A hushed silence fell over the growing crowd. She heard someone whisper, "Is she really going to play?" And another voice answer, "This should be good." The bench felt both familiar and strange beneath her. It had been so long, nearly 20 years since she had last sat before a piano. After her mother died, after they moved to this country, after Lucia was born and her husband left, there had never been money for a piano, never been time for music. Just work and more work, trying to build a life for her daughter that was better than her own. Elena placed her hands on the keys but didn't press down. The ivory felt cool beneath her fingertips. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to quiet the pounding of her heart. What was she doing? These people expected her to fail, to fumble through some children's tune and provide them with a few seconds of amusement at her expense before they returned to their champagne and conversations about summer homes. "Well?" Thomas prompted, impatience creeping into his voice. "We don't have all night." Elena opened her eyes and tested a key near the middle of the keyboard. The note rang out, clear and true. She tried another and another. Some responded, others remained silent. Dead keys, just as she'd heard. There was no pattern to it. The broken keys were scattered throughout the keyboard. A few people chuckled as she continued to test different notes, seemingly at random. Elena ignored them, focused now on mapping out which keys worked and which didn't. Her mind began to race, mentally rearranging music she once knew to avoid the dead zones. "I think she's stalling," the third man stage whispered, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Elena's fingers paused over the keys. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to play. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the air, slightly modified to work around the broken keys. Elena's fingers moved slowly at first, hesitant after so many years of silence. But with each passing second, something awakened inside her. Muscle memory, perhaps, or something deeper. Her hands remembered what her conscious mind had begun to forget. The small crowd grew quiet. Thomas's smirk faltered. As Elena continued to play, adjusting the piece on the fly to accommodate the piano's limitations, her confidence grew. Her body swayed gently with the music, eyes half closed as she gave herself over to the beauty of the composition. The Debussy piece was challenging on a fully functioning piano. On this broken instrument, it required a kind of musical problem-solving that engaged her completely. When she encountered a dead key essential to the melody, she would transpose on the spot, shifting octaves or finding harmonious alternatives that somehow preserved the heart of the music. The crowd had grown larger. Now, people were abandoning conversations mid-sentence, drinks in hand, drawn by the unexpected music floating through the ballroom. The string quartet in the corner had stopped playing to listen. Elena didn't notice any of this. She was lost in the music, in the pure joy of playing again after so long. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, focusing on the keys beneath her fingers. As Clair de Lune came to an end, she transitioned seamlessly into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of her mother's favorites. The piece was even more challenging with the broken keys, but Elena had found her rhythm now, her confidence. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, finding new pathways through the familiar melody. The piano might be damaged, but in Elena's hands it sang as though it had been waiting all these years just for her. From the corner of her eye, she could see Thomas and his friends standing rigid with surprise. Beyond them, the crowd had grown, larger still. Some people had tears in their eyes. An older man near the front was watching her hands with intense focus, his expression a mixture of disbelief and wonder. Vivian had made her way to the front of the crowd. She stood with one hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide. Next to her was Mr. Reynolds, the hotel manager, the same man who had once berated Elena for taking too long to clean the executive suites. Now he was watching her play with his mouth slightly open, all traces of his usual stern expression gone. As Elena neared the end of the Chopin piece, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Whatever happened next, whether these people mocked her or praised her, didn't matter. For these few minutes she had reclaimed a part of herself that had been lost for too long. The final notes hung in the air, then faded to silence. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Elena sat still, hands resting lightly on the keys, afraid to break the spell that had fallen over the room. Then someone began to clap. Others joined in, the applause swelling until it filled the entire ballroom. Elena turned on the bench, stunned by the response. People were standing, some wiping away tears, all of them looking at her with expressions she had never seen directed her way before. Respect, admiration, even awe. Thomas and his friends had backed away slightly, their faces flushed with what might have been shame. The older man who had been watching her hands so intently stepped forward. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice carrying enough authority that people nearby quieted to hear him. "Especially given the condition of the instrument. Where did you study?" Elena's throat felt tight. I never studied formally. My mother taught me, and then a neighbor gave me lessons when I was young. Back in Mexico City. Never studied formally," the man repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. "My dear, do you have any idea what you just did? You rearranged complex, classical pieces in real time to accommodate broken keys. That's not just talent, that's genius." A murmur ran through the crowd. Elena felt her cheeks grow warm again, but this time not from embarrassment. The man held out his hand. "I'm Arthur Chen, director of the City Symphony Orchestra, and I think we need to talk." Elena stared at his outstretched hand, unable to believe what was happening. Around her, the crowd continued to applaud, the sound washing over her like a wave. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could almost hear her mother's voice. "Music lives in your fingers, Elenita. Never forget that." She hadn't forgotten after all. Elena looked at Arthur Chen's outstretched hand for a long moment before finally reaching out to shake it. His grip was firm and warm, his eyes kind but intense as they studied her face. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely audible above the continued applause. "What do you mean we need to talk?" Before Arthur could answer, Vivian pushed forward through the crowd, her face glowing with excitement. "Elena, my God, I had no idea you could play like that. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Mr. Reynolds, the hotel manager, was right behind her. 15 years, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. 15 years you've worked for this hotel, and we never knew." Elena felt overwhelmed by the attention. Just 30 minutes ago, she had been invisible to these people, just another body moving through the background of their lives. Now they were all looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. It made her uncomfortable, but there was something else mixed with the discomfort, a strange sense of satisfaction of finally being recognized as more than just her job. "Please, it wasn't anything special," she said, attempting to stand, but Arthur Chen gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "On the contrary," he said, "what you just did was remarkable. To adapt those pieces on the fly, working around the broken keys, that shows not just technical skill but a deep understanding of music theory and composition." He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please give Ms." He paused, looking back at Elena. "Murphy," she supplied. "Elena Murphy." "Give Ms. Murphy some space," Arthur continued. "This isn't a circus performance." The crowd reluctantly began to disperse, though many people lingered nearby, casting curious glances in Elena's direction. Thomas and his friends had disappeared entirely, melting away into the ballroom. "Elena," Vivian said, crouching down beside the piano bench. "Why didn't you tell me you were a pianist? All those times we talked about the charity gala entertainment." Elena shrugged, suddenly feeling tired. It didn't seem important. It was another life, a long time ago. "Another life?" Arthur asked, his interest clearly piqued. "What happened?" Elena hesitated. These were not things she talked about, not even with the few friends she had made since coming to this country. Her past belonged to her alone, a private history she carried silently through her days of cleaning hotel rooms and polishing fixtures. But something about the genuine interest in Arthur's eyes, the absence of pity or condescension, made her want to explain. "My mother was a piano teacher in Mexico City," she began. "She taught me from the time I was 4 years old. Later I had lessons with a neighbor who had studied at the conservatory." She paused, running her fingers lightly over the piano keys, without pressing them down. "Everyone said I had talent. There was talk of scholarships, of music school, but then my mother got sick. Cancer. We came north for treatment, spent everything we had. After she died, I had no money to go back, no money for school. Then I met my husband, had my daughter." She trailed off, the familiar ache of what might have been rising in her chest. "Life happens, you know. You make choices. You do what you must." Arthur nodded slowly. "And you haven't played since then? Not at all?" Elena shook her head. "No pianos in the places I've lived, no time anyway. I work 2 jobs most weeks." "2 jobs," Arthur repeated, as if trying to reconcile this information with the musical gift he had just witnessed. "And one of them is here, at the hotel?" "Yes, housekeeping. 15 years now." Mr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably beside Vivian. Elena had never seen her boss look so awkward, so unsure of himself. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Murphy has been one of our most reliable employees," he said stiffly. "Always punctual, very thorough." "I'm sure," Arthur said, not taking his eyes off Elena. "But I think perhaps her talents have been somewhat underutilized." A small crowd still hovered nearby, watching the conversation with undisguised curiosity. Among them, Elena noticed the woman in the red dress who had tried to intervene earlier. She caught Elena's eye and gave her a small, encouraging smile. "Ms. Murphy," Arthur said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a business card. "The City Symphony has a community outreach program. We provide music education in underserved neighborhoods, piano lessons for children who wouldn't otherwise have access." He handed her the card. "We're always looking for talented instructors. Would you be interested in teaching for us? The pay is modest, but—" "Teaching?" Elena interrupted, surprised. "Me? But I have no degree, no qualifications." Arthur smiled. "After what I just heard, I'd say you're more than qualified. Formal education isn't everything. Some of the most brilliant musicians I know never set foot in a conservatory." Elena stared at the card in her hand, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. Teaching piano? Being paid to make music rather than clean up after other people? It seemed impossible, like something from a dream. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say you'll think about it," Arthur replied, "and that you'll come to my office next week so we can discuss the details." We have several pianos that need a good playing. He glanced at his watch. I have to make an announcement about the fundraising. Total in a few minutes, but please consider my offer. With that, he nodded to Vivian and Mr. Reynolds and made his way back into the crowd, leaving Elena sitting at the piano bench, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 15 minutes. Vivian squeezed her arm gently. Elena, this is amazing. What an opportunity. I don't know, Elena said, doubt creeping into her voice. Teaching children from wealthy families? They'd take one look at me and… The program isn't for wealthy families, Vivian corrected her. Arthur's foundation provides free music education in neighborhoods like yours. My sister volunteers for them sometimes. The children would be just like your Lucia was at that age. The mention of her daughter made Elena's heart twist. How proud Lucia would be to see her mother doing something like this, something that used her true gifts instead of just her labor. Lucia had always believed Elena was capable of more, had always pushed her to dream bigger. I need to think, Elena said finally, standing up from the piano bench. This is all happening so fast. Mr. Reynolds nodded. Of course, of course. Take all the time you need, Ms. Murphy. His tone was different now, respectful, almost deferential. And please know that whatever you decide, your position at the Grand Phoenix is secure. Elena thanked him, though the irony wasn't lost on her. Just last month, he had called her into his office to reprimand her for spending too long chatting with an elderly guest who was lonely and wanted company. We don't pay you to socialize, he had said sternly. Now he was looking at her as if she were someone important, someone to be reckoned with. As the crowd finally dispersed and the regular buzz of conversation returned to the ballroom, Elena found herself alone by the piano once more. She ran her hand along its polished surface, this time with a new appreciation. This broken instrument had changed something tonight, had cracked open a door she had thought was permanently closed. The woman in the red dress approached, 2 champagne flutes in her hands. She offered one to Elena with a warm smile. That was truly beautiful, she said. I don't think I've ever heard anything quite like it. Elena accepted the champagne with a murmured, thank you, still feeling slightly dazed. I'm Pauline Bennett, the woman continued. I teach music at the university across town. What you did with that Chopin piece was remarkable. The way you reworked it around the broken keys, it was like hearing it for the first time. Thank you, Elena said, sipping the champagne. The kova, bubbles tickled her nose, making her eyes water slightly. Or perhaps it wasn't the champagne at all. I used to love Chopin. My mother said his music speaks directly to the heart. Your mother was right, Pauline replied. She hesitated, then added, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with Arthur. If you do decide to teach for his program, and you'd like some help getting started, lesson plans, teaching methods, that sort of thing, I'd be happy to assist. Elena looked at her in surprise. You would do that? For a stranger? Pauline smiled. Musicians help each other. Besides, talent like yours shouldn't go to waste. She nodded toward the business card still clutched in Elena's hand. Think about it at least. Sometimes life gives us second chances when we least expect them. As Pauline walked away, Elena felt her phone vibrate in her small purse. It was a text from Lucia. How's it going? Bored yet? Elena smiled, typing back, You won't believe what just happened. Elena's fingers hovered over her phone screen. How could she possibly explain everything that had happened in a text message? She started typing, then stopped, then started again. Finally, she simply wrote, Something amazing happened. Can't explain now. Pick me up at 10. 3 dots appeared. Immediately as Lucia typed back, 10 it is. Now I'm super curious. Better be a good story. Elena smiled and slipped the phone back into her purse. A good story indeed, one she could hardly believe herself. She looked down at Arthur Chen's business card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. Arthur Chen, Director, City Symphony. Orchestra. Below that was an address downtown, in the Arts District where Elena cleaned office buildings on weekends for extra money. She had walked past the Symphony Hall countless times, occasionally pausing to look at posters for upcoming performances, never imagining she might one day have a connection to the place. "Elena, are you all right?" She looked up to find Vivian watching her with concerned eyes. "Yes," Elena said, tucking the card carefully into her purse. "Just thinking. You should eat something," Vivian said, gently taking her elbow. "Come with me. The food is excellent, and after that performance you must be hungry." Elena allowed herself to be led toward the buffet tables. As they walked, she noticed how differently people looked at her now. Some nodded in recognition, others smiled or whispered to their companions as she passed. A few even approached to compliment her playing. Each time Elena thanked them awkwardly, unused to such attention. At the buffet, Vivian handed her a plate. "Take whatever you like. The chef outdid himself tonight." Elena looked at the elaborate spread, tiny pastries, filled with colorful mousses, delicate arrangements of smoked salmon, platters of rare beef sliced paper thin. In her 15 years at the hotel, she had never tasted the food served at these events, only cleaned up the remains afterward. "I'm not sure what half of these things are," she admitted quietly to Vivian. "Then try them all," Vivian replied with a smile, adding a selection of items to Elena's plate. They found a small table in a quiet corner of the ballroom. Elena ate slowly, savoring each bite. The food was indeed delicious, flavors and textures she had never experienced before. "So," Vivian said after a moment, "are you going to accept Arthur's offer?" Elena set down her fork. "I don't know. It seems impossible." "Why impossible?" "I haven't played in 20 years before tonight. I have no teaching experience. And my schedule, I work 40 hours here, plus weekends cleaning offices. When would I have time to teach?" Vivian leaned forward. "Elena, you've been cleaning rooms at this hotel for 15 years. You've never once called in sick, never taken a vacation, never asked for special treatment. Maybe it's time you did something for yourself." "It's not that simple," Elena replied. "I have bills, rent. Lucy is still in college. Her scholarship doesn't cover everything. Arthur's program pays," Vivian pointed out. "Maybe not as much as 2 jobs, but—" She hesitated, then continued more carefully. "What if I talk to Mr. Reynolds about adjusting your schedule here? Maybe fewer hours, more flexibility? After tonight, I think he'd be open to it." Elena stared at her. "You would do that? Why?" Vivian's eyes softened. "Because I've known you for 5 years, and I've always thought you were special somehow. There was a dignity about you, a quiet strength. Now I know why." She gestured toward the piano across the room. "That gift you have, it shouldn't be buried under mop buckets and cleaning supplies." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Vivian replied with a wink. "Wait until I've convinced Reynolds to give you every weekend off, or—" As they continued eating, the conversation around them grew louder. The charity auction was starting, with Arthur Chen serving as auctioneer. Elena watched as wealthy patrons bid thousands of dollars for vacation packages, artwork, and wine collections. The money would go to the children's hospital, a worthy cause, she thought. But she couldn't help calculating how many months of rent each bid represented, how many grocery trips, how many textbooks for Lucia. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Harrington for $12,000. Arthur announced as a painting by a local artist found a new home. The crowd applauded. "And now," Arthur continued, "we have a special, unplanned addition to our auction." He smiled, his eyes finding Elena across the room. "A private piano performance by the remarkable musician we discovered in our midst tonight, Ms. Elena Murphy." Elena nearly choked on her drink. "What?" she gasped, looking at Vivian in alarm. Vivian seemed equally surprised. "He didn't mention this to me," she said. "Ms. Murphy has graciously agreed to perform at the home of whoever makes the highest bid," Arthur continued smoothly, though Elena had agreed to no such thing. All proceeds, of course, going to the children's hospital. The bidding started immediately. 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, 7. Elena sat frozen, unable to believe what was happening. How could Arthur do this without asking her? What if she refused? 15,000, called a voice from the back of the room. The crowd turned to see Thomas, the young man who had first pushed Elena to play the piano as a joke. His face was flushed, but his expression was determined. $15,000, Arthur repeated. Do I hear 16? A moment of silence, then 20,000. This from an older couple near the front. The woman wearing diamonds that caught the light as she raised her hand. 25, countered Thomas immediately. Elena felt dizzy. These people were bidding thousands of dollars for her to play the piano in their homes. It seemed absurd, unreal. $30,000, called the diamond woman's husband. Arthur beamed. 30,000 going once. 50,000, Thomas said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Even Arthur seemed taken aback. $50,000, he repeated. Going once, going twice. He paused, looking around the room. No one spoke. Sold to Mr. Thomas Baldwin for $50,000. The room erupted in applause. Thomas nodded, accepting congratulations from those around him, but his eyes sought out Elena. When he found her, he gave a small, almost apologetic nod. I need some air, Elena said to Vivian, rising from her seat. She made her way quickly through the crowd toward the balcony doors, feeling overwhelmed and slightly angry. How dare Arthur auction her off like that without even asking? And why? Would Thomas, who had tried to humiliate her earlier, bid such an enormous sum? The night air was cool on her face as she stepped onto the balcony. The city spread out below, a tapestry of lights against the darkness. Elena gripped the stone railing, trying to steady her breathing, trying to make sense of the evening's events. Ms. Murphy? She turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, his expression uncertain. May I speak with you? He asked. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Thomas joined her at the railing, keeping a respectful distance. I owe you an apology, he said after a moment. What I did earlier, it was cruel and thoughtless. I'm deeply ashamed. Elena studied his face. He seemed sincere, though that didn't erase what had happened. Why did you do it? She asked quietly. Thomas looked down at his hands. Honestly, I don't really know. Showing off for my friends, I suppose. Being the rich jerk everyone expects me to be. He sighed. My father owns the hotel chain. I grew up with all this. He gestured toward the ballroom behind them. And somehow it made me think I was better than everyone else. Especially the staff. He turned to face her fully. But when you played, it was like you showed me exactly how small I really am, how little I've done with all the advantages I've had. Elena said nothing, letting his words hang in the air between them. The $50,000, Thomas continued. It's not just for the performance, though I would be honored if you would play for my family. It's penance, I suppose. And an investment. An investment? Elena repeated, confused. Arthur told me about his teaching program. I want to help fund a scholarship for promising students who can't afford lessons. Students like you were once. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out to her. This is for you. Consider it an advance on your performance fee. Elena made no move to take it. I never agreed to perform for you. I know, Thomas admitted. And you don't have to. The donation to the hospital stands either way. But I hoped... He paused, then continued more softly. I hoped you might give me a chance to make amends. Elena looked at the envelope, then back at Thomas's face. I'll think about it, she said finally. Thomas nodded, setting the envelope on the railing. Between them. That's all I can ask. He turned to go, then stopped. You're playing. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. My grandmother was a pianist. She would have loved to meet you. With that, he went back inside, leaving Elena alone on the balcony. She picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a check, made out to her for $5,000, more money than she made in 2 months of full-time work. Elena stared at it, her vision blurring slightly. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to reject this gesture from someone who had tried to humiliate her. But another part, the practical part that had kept her and Lucia fed and housed all these years, knew what this money could mean. Bills paid, a little breathing room, maybe even a small piano for their apartment. She folded the check carefully and placed it in her purse alongside Arthur's business card. The future suddenly seemed full of possibilities she hadn't dared imagine just hours ago. And it all started with a cruel joke about a broken piano. 3 months later, Elena stood in the doorway of a small classroom, watching as 7 children settled into their seats. The room wasn't fancy, just a converted storage space in the community center with freshly painted walls and decent lighting, but it had been transformed by the addition of 3 upright pianos positioned against the far wall. A large window overlooked a playground where other children shouted and laughed in the afternoon sun. "Are you nervous?" Pauline asked, appearing beside her with a stack of sheet music. Elena smiled. A little, but excited too. In the weeks following, the charity gala. Elena's life had changed in ways she could never have predicted. She had gone to meet with Arthur Chen the very next Monday, half expecting him to have forgotten his offer or changed his mind. Instead, she found him waiting eagerly, ready to show her around the symphony's outreach facilities and introduce her to the program coordinators. By the end of that week, she had agreed to teach 2 beginner piano classes for children from low-income neighborhoods, the same kind of neighborhood where she and Lucia lived. The classes would meet twice weekly after school hours, which meant Elena could keep her job at the hotel, though with reduced hours as Vivian had promised to arrange. "You'll be wonderful," Pauline assured her now, squeezing her arm gently. In the past months, Pauline had become both mentor and friend, helping Elena prepare lesson plans and refresh her knowledge of music theory. They had spent countless hours at Pauline's home piano, with Elena practicing techniques she had almost forgotten and learning new teaching methods. "I still can't believe this is happening," Elena said quietly. "Sometimes I think I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." Pauline laughed. "If it's a dream, we're all sharing it." She nodded toward the classroom. "Those children are waiting for you. Go make some music." Taking a deep breath, Elena entered the room. 7 pairs of eyes turned to her, curious, excited, a few nervous. The children ranged in age from 8 to 12, with diverse backgrounds reflected in their faces. Elena recognized parts of herself in each of them, the same hunger for something beautiful in their lives, the same potential waiting to be discovered. "Good afternoon," she said, setting her bag on the small desk at the front of the room. "My name is Ms. Murphy, and I'm going to be your piano teacher." A small girl in the front row raised her hand immediately. "Have you been playing piano a long time?" she asked. Elena smiled. "Yes and no. I started when I was very young. Younger than most of you. But then I stopped for many years. I'm learning again along with all of you. If you stopped, how do you still know how to play?" asked a boy near the window, his forehead wrinkled in confusion. "Music stays with you," Elena explained, tapping her chest. "Even when you don't play for a long time, it waits inside you. Like riding a bicycle or swimming, once you learn, your body remembers." She moved to the center piano and sat down, inviting the children to gather around her. "Today, we're going to learn the names of the keys and play our first notes. But first, I want to show you something." Elena began to play, not a complex classical piece this time, but a simple folk melody her mother had taught her when she was their age. The children watched, mesmerized, as her fingers danced across the keys, creating a tune that seemed to fill the small room with sunlight and warmth. "Music is a language," she told them as she finished. "It speaks without words. It can tell stories, share feelings, bring people together. And today, you're going to start learning that language." As the lesson progressed, Elena felt a growing sense of rightness, as if she had finally found her way back to a path she was always meant to walk. She moved among the children, adjusting small fingers on keys, offering encouragement, celebrating tiny victories as they played their first notes. The hour passed quickly, filled with laughter, concentration, and the plinking sounds of beginner pianists finding their way. When the lesson ended, and the children had gone, buzzing with excitement about what they had learned, Elena sat alone at one of the pianos. She played softly, her mind drifting back over the extraordinary chain of events that had led her here. The door opened, and Lucia stepped in, her backpack slung over one shoulder. At 22, she looked more like Elena every day, the same. Dark eyes, the same determined set to her jaw. "How was your first class, Professor Murphy?" Lucia asked with a grin, dropping her backpack on a chair. Elena rolled her eyes at the title, but couldn't help smiling. "It was good. Really good, actually. The children are eager to learn." "Just like someone else I know," Lucia said, sitting beside her mother on the piano bench. "You've been practicing night and day for weeks." It was true. The small upright piano they had purchased with part of Thomas's check now occupied a place of honor in their apartment living room. Elena played whenever she could, early mornings before work, evenings after dinner, weekends between chores. The neighbors hadn't complained. In fact, several had knocked on the door to tell her how much they enjoyed hearing the music through the walls. "I have a lot of catching up to do," Elena said. 20 years is a long time." "Arthur doesn't seem to think you're behind," Lucia pointed out. "He said you could audition for the symphony if you wanted." Elena shook her head. "That's different. That's not for me." "Why not?" "Because I'm a cleaning woman who got lucky, not a professional musician." Lucia frowned. "That's not true. You were always a musician. You just couldn't play for a while." She took her mother's hand. "You taught me that we should never let other people tell us who we are or what we can become, remember?" Elena smiled, remembering the many times she had repeated those words to Lucia throughout her childhood. When other children had made fun of her second-hand clothes. When a teacher had suggested she aim for community college instead of university. When her father had reappeared briefly, only to disappear again after promising to help with tuition. "I was talking about you then," Elena said. "Your future. And I'm talking about you now," Lucia replied firmly. "Your future." Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the open door. They looked up to see Thomas standing there, looking somewhat out of place in his expensive suit amid the simple classroom furnishings. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. Elena shook her head. "We were just finishing up. Thomas, this is my daughter, Lucia. Lucia, this is Mr. Baldwin. The guy who bid $50,000 to hear you play," Lucia said, recognition dawning on her face. She had heard the story many times by now. "The one who started the scholarship fund." Thomas nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "That's me, though your mother deserves the credit for the scholarship idea. I just provided the funding." In the months since the gala, Thomas had become an unexpected ally in Elena's new musical journey. True to his word, he had established a scholarship fund for promising students who couldn't afford lessons. The first recipients would be chosen from Elena's classes at the end of the term. He had also kept his distance, never pressuring Elena about the promised private performance. Today was the first time he had visited the community center. "I wanted to see the program in action," he explained, gesturing around the classroom. "Arthur speaks very highly of what you're doing here." "We're just getting started," Elena said, "but the children seem eager to learn." Thomas smiled. "That's what matters most, isn't it? The eagerness." He hesitated, then added, "I also wanted to let you know that the renovation is complete." Elena looked at him questioningly. "The piano." "At the hotel," Thomas clarified. "The one you played that night. I had it fully restored. Every key works now." "You didn't have to do that," Elena said. "I wanted to." Thomas shrugged. It seemed wrong to leave it broken after hearing what it could do in the right hands. Lucia looked between them, then stood up. "I'll wait outside, Mom. Nice to meet you, Mr. Baldwin." After Lucia left, Thomas took a step closer. "I was wondering," he said carefully, "if you might consider playing it again, now that it's fixed. The hotel is hosting another charity event next month, for music education this time. It would mean a lot to have you perform." Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. 3 months ago, she would have refused immediately, too afraid of putting herself out there, too convinced she didn't belong on that stage. But things were different now. She was different. "I'd need to practice on it first," she said finally, "to get a feel for it now that it's been repaired." Thomas broke into a smile. "Of course, whenever you'd like, just name the day." "And I'd want my students to attend?" Elena added. "They should see what's possible with practice and dedication." "I'll arrange for transportation myself," Thomas promised. "And the best seats in the house." Elena nodded, a plan taking shape in her mind. "Then yes, I'll play." As Thomas left, clearly delighted with her answer, Elena turned back to the piano. Her fingers found the keys without her having to look, playing the opening notes of a piece she had been working on for weeks, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for someone who had been away from music for so long. But Pauline had encouraged her to reach beyond what seemed possible, to trust in the foundation her mother had given her all those years ago. The music swelled in the small classroom, powerful and complex. Elena lost herself in it, feeling the familiar joy rise within her as the melody took flight. She was no longer just Elena Murphy, the cleaning woman. She was Elena Murphy, pianist. Elena Murphy, teacher. Elena Murphy, musician. A simple woman who had been told to play a broken piano as a joke, and whose talent had moved a room full of strangers, changed the course of her life, and brought her back to herself. The music spoke what words could not. That it is never too late to reclaim what you love, that hidden gifts wait patiently to be rediscovered, and that sometimes the most beautiful melodies emerge from instruments and lives that were once believed to be broken beyond repair.